Welcome to Secret Story. I continue the tale of how I got involved in the amazing exploits of Lupe, my uncle's second wife, when I stayed at their guest house. Then Izzy had asked me to come to her guest house, Casa Rosita, where a gang of young guys had arrived for a friend's wedding. Later Lupe arrived to join and all 6 guys began to crowd around the 2 beds, but as they did so, they were standing between my viewpoint and the bed, blocking my view of Lupe and Izzy. Luckily Izzy instantly realized this was going to be a problem for their secret voyeur. "Wait, guys, we gotta keep the foot of the beds clear, or Lupe and I aren't going to get any air," Izzy explained. She pointed up to the air conditioning unit that was fixed to the wall directly above the obsolete ventilation fans that I was looking through. I was in a small storage room, which shared a wall with the guys' guest room, and through the fan was able to spy into their room to see all the action. It was getting pretty warm in here, as the afternoon sun beat down on the guest house building, so it was a reasonable explanation from Izzy to the guys to not stand in front of the end of the beds, so she and Lupe could get the full benefit of the cool air from the air conditioning unit. Unknowingly to the guys, her real reason of course was she knew I was there watching my 2 favorite MILFs, and they both loved to be watched. "Yes, we're all going to get very hot, let's keep this area clear," Lupe agreed, pointing to the end of the bed. "In fact, can we move the beds closer to the air con?" Lupe looked over her shoulder, grinning in my direction. She wanted me to get an even better view of the action. She began to step off the bed to move it, but Jeff stepped in, encouraging her to stay on. "Don't worry, Mrs. Lopez, we'll move it for you," he said. The other guys nodded, and grabbed a corner of Lupe's bed and began lifting, inching the bed forward, toward the wall with the air con unit, toward me. These 6 guys were obviously they didn't want anything to get in the way of that. They would have literally ripped the bed from the floor had it been bolted down, but luckily it wasn't. 6 strong young guys easily lifted one double. And I would have a much better, closer view of it all. "Can someone pass me my jacket again?" Lupe asked, "and get us some towels please." Ronnie collected her jacket off the floor and handed it to her. Paul grabbed some towels from the bathroom and placed a couple on Lupe's bed, and a couple on Izzy's. I figured it would not be the last time she would be taking a facial today. Again, more clapping and cheers from the guys followed. The 2 ladies giggled at each other. "Is this the first time you're cheating on your husbands with a young guy then?" Marcus asked. "No, we have our own called Jack, don't we Izzy?" Lupe giggled. "So, what happened to Jack then?" Marcus asked. Intrigued. "Oh, he's still around," Izzy giggled, looking toward the ventilation fan I was spying through. "Yeah, he's not far away," Lupe grinned. For the next hour or so on and on it went. As soon as one guy another was ready to replace him from the sofa. "Time to change up a gear again," Izzy said, looking across to Lupe nodding, "Any a goal now, boys?" Another 30 minutes or so passed. Ronnie decided to hand out some cans of beer to everyone to keep the party going. The ladies simply laughed. 20 minutes later there was no one on the sofa taking a rest now. "Oh, I don't want this to ever end," Izzy sighed. Lupe replied, but in Spanish, so I couldn't understand, but both she and Izzy giggled. Sandy too laughed at Lupe's comment. "What? What was that?" Ronnie asked. "I said to Izzy, we both stink of cheap beer." Lupe giggled. Everyone laughed, enjoying the joke. "Naughty boys," Lupe giggled. "You know boys, I've done a lot of crazy stuff in my life, but there's one thing I fantasized about that I never got to try," Lupe said, looking up at all 6 guys around the room. "Will you help me live my fantasy?" "Yes, of course, Mrs. Lopez," said Paul. "Yes, ma'am," replied Andre. "What is it?" asked Marcus. "Oh, boys. My lovely boys. I want to be made airtight." Lupe replied, with a grin a mile wide. "Holy!" exclaimed Jeff. The other guys cheered, hooped and hollered, all apart from Andre the Innocent, who seemed unsure as to exactly what Lupe was asking for. He would soon be finding out. Oh yeah, I like the sound of that, Izzy said, a big smile on her face. I couldn't believe what I was seeing airtight. Santi shouted out. The other guys laughed. Come on, everyone. 1, 2, 3. Santi shouted out again. Airtight. 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 All the guys shouted out in unison, laughing. The guys then gave each other high-five gestures, perhaps also not quite believing what they were seeing and participating in. Santi and Andre retired back to the sofa. I had to wonder just exactly how many men Izzy and Lupe had with between them. It seemed like this was the first time they had done anything like this before. Uncle Jerry. Likewise, Izzy's husband Emiliano. What would they think if they could see the scenes that I was seeing right now? I realized at that moment just what a very, very lucky position I was in. I was getting Lupe and Izzy. Of course, the other renters in the two Guesthouses could say the same. However, I had also been invited into Lupe and Izzy's secret worlds. By them allowing me tea, I knew I had to cherish every moment I spent in their world, as I knew I would miss it like crazy once I had to eventually return home to London. You'll have to excuse me for a moment, boys. I need to make a phone call, Lupe announced. Thank you, Mrs. Lopez, Ronnie sighed, looking up at her. Oh, don't worry, boys, I'll be back soon. Lupe smirked, looking to Izzy. Lupe then turned and left the room through the door out onto the veranda. A moment later there was a soft knock on the door to the storage room that I was spying from. The door opened slightly, and Lupe stepped in, a big grin on her face, closing the door quietly behind herself. Lupe looked at me and giggled. Is this what you do when you watch me? She whispered, smiling. Lupe quickly peered through the ventilation fan that I had been using to spy on her and Izzy's antics. Are you enjoying the show, Jack? Lupe asked, smiling. You know this is just living out a big fantasy for me and Izzy. Don't worry. You're still our favorite young guy. I think we've both fallen in love with you just a little bit. I nodded, smiling back. I again wondered what Uncle Jerry would think if he could see his wife now. Thanked my lucky stars my uncle had met Lupe in the first place, otherwise all these wonderful experiences would be happening to some other young guy, I supposed. Okay, baby, I got to get back to the boys, Lupe explained, giggling, but thank you for coming down here and watching over us, and making sure Izzy and I were safe. We both really appreciate it. We needed someone here just in case, you know. Appeared back outside, the storage door closing behind her. The door opened. And Lupe returned, grinning. I'm back, boys, she announced, as the door closed behind her. They were having the time of their lives, and I was happy for them, and happy to enjoy the show. I suddenly felt the need to go to the bathroom, however, so decided I should leave the ladies to it for a while. Lupe had already told me she and Izzy felt safe now with these guys, so I reasoned it was okay for me to disappear. I quietly crept out of the storage room, closing the door behind me. I looked up and down the veranda, and down into the courtyard. There was no one around. I went down the staircase and crossed the courtyard. Next to the reception office was a small, separate bathroom. I quickly went inside. I decided I was pretty thirsty. It had been quite hot in the storage room, and I had been sweating a bit. I decided to walk down to the local store and get something to drink. I exited the courtyard through the gate and made my way down the street. The sun was starting to go down. It was now almost 5 p.m. Izzy had been entertaining the boys for almost 3 hours now, Lupe being the late arrival, a little less. Did they ever get tired? In the store, I bought a bottle of water and drank it on my way back to Casa Rosita Guesthouse. The scooter I had borrowed from my uncle for the ride over here was still parked outside in the street. I realized now that if Izzy's husband Emiliano had spotted and recognized the scooter from my previous visit, he might find it suspicious. I assumed he hadn't spotted it before he left, but I decided to move it around the corner anyway. As I drove it around the block, I thought about just going back to my room at Casa Madre Guesthouse. But there was an incredible gangbang still going on in room 28, one that I had been invited to watch. How many times in my life would that happen? So, I parked up the scooter, and raced back to the guest house, through the gate, across the courtyard, and quietly back up the stairwell. I gently opened the storage door and closed it behind me. I peered back through the obsolete ventilation fan that had become my friend, to see exactly what they were up to now. Both women had huge grins on their faces. So, it seemed it had been Lupe who had decided to change it around while I had briefly been away. At this point, I decided to leave the ladies to it. It could take all evening. Lupe had said they felt safe now and didn't need my presence as a backup in case things had turned nasty somehow. Besides, the heat in the storage room had made me rather tired, and I needed a nap. I took a final look around the room. What a mess. There were clothes, empty beer cans, and use strewn all across the floor. It made me wonder which of the boys were staying in this room. They were going to have a bit of a cleanup job whenever this seemingly to an end. Perhaps they were relying on Izzy to clean it all up tomorrow, as she had told me previously one of her duties was the daily maid service to any occupied rooms. But that would seem a bit much, making her clean up this mess after all the pleasure she had given them today. I imagined they would do it themselves. I replaced the fan blades I had removed earlier, and returned the piece of black cardboard into the rear of the obsolete ventilation fan, so there would be no chance of someone later noticing it missing and getting suspicious. I opened the storage room door, and stepped back out onto the veranda, quietly closing the door behind me. There was a fair breeze out here now. It felt like maybe a storm was coming. I looked along down the veranda toward room 28 and noticed the door had swung open in the breeze. I guess Lupe hadn't closed it properly. It meant that all along this veranda, and the ones above and below, and across the courtyard, anyone listening could hear exactly what was going on in room 28. I headed down the staircase, and out into the courtyard. I had to smile, they were both so insatiable. They couldn't have known that the whole courtyard could hear them, but if they did, they probably wouldn't have cared. The other guests, if they could hear, were probably smiling to themselves, just as I was, thinking of all the naughty things Lupe and Izzy were up to. As long as their husbands didn't find out, it was all good as far as they were concerned. I made my way out through the courtyard gate, and back out onto the street. Out here you couldn't hear what was going on over the wall, at the back of the guest house courtyard, in room 28. That was good news. I'm sure Izzy didn't want her establishment becoming known publicly as a den of iniquity, only privately to her special guests. As I walked back to the scooter parked around the block, I thought about all I had seen and heard. It had been an incredible afternoon of voyeurism. I wondered about the something special that Lupe had mentioned, that she and Izzy were planning to do to thank me for being their secret backup today. I also wondered what Lupe and Izzy's special favor was that they had agreed to with the boys. I'm sure I would find out in the coming days. To be continued. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. No part of this story can be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means without written permission from the author. All characters are fictitious, and any similarity to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental unless otherwise stated. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends and subscribe to the channel.